The winter of 1984 arrived early that year, wrapping the small town in sharp wind and frost that crept into bones and homes alike. Clara Whitfield had just finished a double shift at the county hospital, her feet aching inside worn shoes, her white nurse's coat folded over her arm. She was 29, unmarried, living alone in a modest rented house near the old railway line. Her life followed a quiet rhythm: work, sleep, repeat, and she rarely expected anything out of the ordinary. That night, as she turned the corner toward her porch, she noticed three figures huddled near her gate, their shadows stretched long by the flickering street lamp. They were teenagers, two boys and a girl, thin as if hunger had carved them down over time. Their jackets were too light for the cold, and their eyes carried a fear no child should know. Clara froze for a moment, instincts battling caution. The town had its share of trouble, and strangers were rarely welcomed after dark. But when the youngest boy stepped forward and asked, in a trembling voice, if she knew where they could find shelter, something inside her softened. She saw not danger, but desperation. Inside her small living room, the heater hummed weakly as Clara poured hot tea into chipped mugs and wrapped the teens in spare blankets. They introduced themselves hesitantly: Daniel, Marcus, and Lily, siblings, they said, though not by blood. Their story spilled out in fragments: a foster home gone wrong, months drifting between bus stations and abandoned buildings, fear of being separated if authorities found them. Clara listened quietly, her nurse's heart aching at the bruises she noticed beneath sleeves and the way Lily flinched at sudden sounds. She knew the risks. Helping them could bring questions, even trouble. But she also knew what it meant to be alone. She offered them her couch and floor for the night, promising nothing more than warmth and rest. That single night turned into a week. Clara cooked simple meals, patched torn clothes, and cleaned wounds with practiced hands. The teenagers helped around the house, careful not to overstay their welcome, but slowly laughter returned to their voices. For the first time in months, they slept without fear. By the end of the second week, reality pressed in. Clara contacted a social worker she trusted, hoping to keep the teens together. Papers were filed, arrangements discussed, but the system moved slowly. One morning, Clara returned from work to find the house empty. The blankets were folded neatly, the mugs washed and placed upside down to dry. On the kitchen table lay a small note, written in uneven handwriting, thanking her for kindness they would never forget. No address, no goodbye beyond those few words. They were gone. Years passed. Life moved forward in quiet ways. Clara continued nursing, eventually transferring to a larger hospital. She never married, never had children, but she carried the memory of those three teenagers like a soft ache in her chest. Sometimes she wondered if they survived, if they stayed together, if her brief kindness had mattered at all. Most days, she told herself it was enough that she had helped, even if only for a moment. 20 years later, on a bright autumn afternoon, Clara was called to the hospital lobby during her lunch break. She expected a patient issue or a delivery. Instead, she found two sharply dressed men waiting beside a woman whose eyes seemed strangely familiar. They smiled when they saw her, and for a heartbeat, time folded in on itself. The woman stepped forward, tears glistening, and spoke Clara's name with the same softness she had heard decades ago. They told her everything: how they had stayed together, how they worked, studied, failed, and tried again. How two of them built businesses from nothing, rising to success they once thought impossible. How the warmth of one nurse's small house in 1984 became the moment they decided to survive, not just exist. They handed her a modest envelope, but the real gift was in their words. She had saved them, even if she never knew it. Clara sat with them in the hospital cafeteria long after her lunch break ended, barely noticing the noise around them. The three strangers from the lobby were no longer strangers at all. Daniel and Marcus, now confident men with calm authority in their voices, spoke of boardrooms and investments, while Lily, elegant and composed, described her work running a foundation for displaced youth. Yet beneath the polished success, Clara still saw the frightened teenagers who once clutched warm mugs in her kitchen. Her hands trembled slightly as she listened, overwhelmed by how far they had come and by the realization that her small act of kindness had echoed through 2 decades. They asked about her life, and Clara answered honestly. She spoke of long nights in emergency rooms, of patients she remembered and others she tried to forget, of the quiet house that still smelled faintly of disinfectant and old books. She admitted that she had often wondered about them, especially on cold nights when winter reminded her of 1984. Lily reached across the table and squeezed her hand, her eyes shining. She told Clara that during their hardest moments, they reminded each other of that week of safety, of someone who expected nothing in return. That memory, Lily said, became their compass. Over the next few days, they insisted on seeing her again. Clara hesitated at first, uncomfortable with the attention, but curiosity and a deep, unspoken affection drew her in. They invited her to dinner at a quiet restaurant, where the soft clink of glasses and low music created a cocoon around them. Daniel spoke about the first business he built from a borrowed computer and sleepless nights, while Marcus described how learning discipline and trust saved him from the anger that once consumed him. Each story circled back to the same truth: they survived because someone once believed they deserved care. When they finally revealed the purpose of their visit, Clara felt her breath catch. They had been searching for her for years, guided only by a last name and a fading memory of a small town. Now that they had found her, they wanted to give back, not just to her, but through her. They spoke of funding a shelter for at-risk teenagers, a place where no one would be turned away for being too complicated or inconvenient. They wanted her to help shape it, to ensure it carried the same warmth she had offered them all those years ago. Clara resisted at first. She was a nurse, not a planner or leader, and the idea of stepping into something so large frightened her. But as they talked, she realized this was not about prestige or money. It was about continuity, about turning one act of compassion into many. Slowly, she agreed to advise, her voice quiet but firm. For the first time in years, she felt something new stirring inside her, purpose beyond routine. Months later, the shelter opened its doors in the very town where Clara once lived alone near the railway line. On opening day, Clara stood at the entrance, watching teenagers step inside with wary eyes and hunched shoulders she recognized all too well. Daniel and Marcus stood beside her, their confidence steady, while Lily greeted each newcomer with a smile that promised safety. A simple plaque near the door carried no names, only words about kindness given freely and never forgotten. As the days passed, Clara found herself spending evenings at the shelter after hospital shifts, listening, tending scraped knees, offering the same quiet reassurance she once gave 3 lost teenagers. Sometimes she caught herself smiling for no reason at all. The house that once echoed with silence now felt fuller, even when she returned home alone. Late one night, as she locked the shelter doors, Lily walked beside her and thanked her again, this time softly, without ceremony. Clara shook her head, finally understanding the truth she had missed for years. She had not simply helped 3 teenagers survive one winter. She had become part of a story that kept unfolding, reaching people she would never meet, warming lives in ways she could not measure. And in that realization, the quiet nurse from 1984 felt richer than she ever imagined possible. The shelter quickly became more than a building, it grew into a living, breathing refuge shaped by the people inside it. Clara settled into a rhythm that surprised even herself. After long hospital shifts, she no longer returned to an empty house with the same heaviness in her chest. Instead, she often stopped by the shelter, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to sit quietly in the common room while teenagers argued over music or laughed at old movies. The sounds filled spaces in her heart she hadn't realized were hollow. The staff respected her instincts, often turning to her in moments when a frightened teen needed gentleness rather than rules. Daniel and Marcus worked tirelessly behind the scenes, ensuring the shelter stayed funded and protected from the pressures that often crushed such projects. They refused to let it become cold or institutional. No metal detectors at the door, no shouting guards, no numbers replacing names. Lily, meanwhile, devoted herself fully to the young people who arrived with nothing but distrust and exhaustion. She saw herself in them, the girl who once slept in fear of morning, and she listened in ways that made even the most guarded teenagers speak. Clara watched with quiet pride, recognizing echoes of the past woven into the present. One evening, a new arrival changed everything for Clara. The boy was 16, withdrawn, with a stubborn silence that reminded her painfully of Marcus all those years ago. He had run from violence and learned to survive by expecting nothing. When Clara gently cleaned a cut on his arm, he flinched but didn't pull away. Over time, small conversations grew. He asked about her nursing pin, about why she always came back after work. One night, he asked her why she cared. The question struck deeper than he knew. Clara answered simply that once, someone needed her, and she never forgot what that felt like. As weeks passed, the boy began to change. He started helping in the kitchen, laughing softly when others teased him. Watching this, Clara felt a profound sense of continuity, as if life had brought her full circle. She realized the shelter was not just a gift to the teenagers, it was healing her, too. The loneliness she had carried for decades loosened its grip, replaced by a sense of belonging she thought she had missed her chance to experience. The true depth of what Clara had given was revealed during a quiet anniversary gathering marking 1 year since the shelter opened. There were no speeches or cameras, just shared food and simple gratitude. Daniel stood up briefly and spoke about 1984, about a night when hope felt impossible. Marcus admitted that without that week of safety, he might not be alive. Lily's voice broke as she described how Clara became their definition of family. Clara listened, tears slipping freely down her face, finally allowing herself to accept what she had meant to them. Later that night, after the shelter lights dimmed, Clara returned home and sat alone at her kitchen table, the same table where a goodbye note once rested. This time, the silence felt different. It was peaceful, not empty. She understood then that kindness does not vanish when it goes unnoticed. It waits, gathering strength, until the day it returns multiplied. The thought filled her with a quiet awe. Years continued to pass, and Clara aged gracefully, her hair silvering, her steps slower but steadier. The shelter expanded, inspiring similar spaces in neighboring towns. Daniel and Marcus ensured the mission remained pure, while Lily trained others to listen the way she once needed someone to listen to her. Clara eventually retired from nursing, but she never truly stopped caring. She became a gentle presence at the shelter, a living reminder that one person's compassion could ripple across decades. On a cold winter evening, much like the one in 1984, Clara stood by the shelter window watching snow fall. Teenagers inside laughed, argued, and lived without fear of the night. She smiled softly, knowing that her life, simple and quiet, had been anything but small. What began as a single act of shelter had become a legacy of hope, proof that love given freely can outlast time, poverty, and even memory itself.